When I first started working at Elevate Corp, a marketing company in the centre of town, I was 18 and didn't have enough money to buy a car or take a taxi to work every morning. Fortunately, my home was only a 20-minute walk away from the office, and my route took me through the local park. Walking through nature is a great way to start the day, and I found it really refreshing. As I strolled through the park, I could hear the birds singing and the rustling of the leaves in the gentle breeze. Sometimes I would stop to take in the sight of the morning dew on the grass or the colourful flowers that lined the path. It's a peaceful and calming experience that helps me to clear my head and feel more centred before a busy day at work. I've never had any trouble on that route in the entire 10 years that I've walked it. That is, until last night when I had an experience that made me change my view of that park and even change my well-trodden route just to avoid going near the place. Yesterday evening, as I was finishing up my work for the day, my boss asked me if I could stay a bit later to help with getting the reports finished ahead of our big quarter-end review on Friday. "We really need to make sure we're ready for the meeting, and I know I can count on you to help us get there," he said with a grateful smile. I was happy to help, and ended up staying an extra 4 hours after my regular quitting time. Once we finished, my boss thanked me again and wished me a good night. As I left the office, I noticed that it was dark outside, rather than the usual mid-evening twilight that I was used to. I began my route home through the streets near my office and towards the park. I'd never normally been out at this time of night, and the town had a completely different feel to it. The streets were empty of all people, and the shops all had their shutters down. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. It gave me an eerie feeling, although I knew it was just the same space I'd walked every day before. As I walked, I thought about how different everything looked at night. The streetlights cast long shadows across the buildings, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly fallen rain. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Hey, are you okay?" A voice suddenly broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see my boss had followed me out of the office building. "I just wanted to make sure you got home okay," he said, looking concerned. I smiled, grateful for his concern. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just a little bit weird being out here at night, you know." "I hear you," he replied, nodding. "But you did a great job today, and I appreciate you staying late to help us out. We couldn't have done it without you." With a final wave, he turned and headed back towards the office, leaving me to continue my walk home. As I made my way through the empty streets, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for my boss's kindness and support. As I made my way through the empty streets of the town, I finally reached the park. I hadn't spent much time there after dark, and the contrast was striking. The streetlights spaced at intervals provided some illumination, but the darkness in between was overwhelming. The park, usually full of life, was now completely deserted. The inky blackness made it hard to see anything at all. The silence was deafening, and my footsteps seemed to echo through the emptiness. Despite my familiarity with the route, I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't the cheerful, peaceful place I knew during the day. It was an eerie and unsettling landscape. I quickened my pace, eager to leave the darkness behind me. As I stepped into the park, the silence was deafening. The stillness was almost overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with doubts. Was it safe to be here? I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I'd walked through the park many times before, even if it was never at night. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my nerves, but the unease persisted. After walking for a couple of minutes, I thought I heard footsteps ringing faintly on the path behind me. The silence of the park and town amplified the sound, making me feel uneasy. I hesitated, then turned around to check if someone was there. As soon as I did, the footsteps abruptly stopped. I scanned the path, but there was no one in sight. The darkness and lack of human activity made it impossible to see anything beyond the reach of the streetlights. I shook off the feeling of paranoia and told myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The silence was probably causing my brain to create phantom noises. With a deep breath, I resumed my walk. Despite the pleasant weather, I couldn't shake off the unease I felt earlier. Then I heard it. I definitely heard it this time. The sound of footsteps growing louder, and a shrill breathing noise joined in. I turned around abruptly, hoping to catch a glimpse of the source, but once again there was nothing there. The silence that followed was almost deafening, and the dimly lit path ahead was empty. My nerves were shot. I had an overwhelming urge to get out of the park as quickly as possible. I quickened my pace, my heart racing with each step, and kept my eyes firmly fixed on the exit ahead. As soon as I turned around and began to walk faster towards the end of the park, those sinister, disembodied footsteps started up again. Much to my horror, the footsteps were louder now, as though they were coming from a place only a few meters behind me. I could now also hear the high-pitched, wheezing breath of their owner. I picked up my pace, my heart racing, hoping to make it out of the park before whatever was following me caught up. But the faster I went, the faster the footsteps and the wheezing breath grew. It was as if they were chasing me, matching my speed and growing closer with each passing second. My mind raced with fear. I had to get out of the park as soon as possible. My heart pounding in my chest, I ran as fast as I could, my legs aching with the effort. The footsteps were getting louder and closer, and I could hear the ragged breaths of the pursuer just behind me. It was almost as though I could feel its putrid breath on the back of my neck. I knew I had to keep going, had to make it to the end of the park and out into the open. Just then a sight came into view which lifted my spirits enough to give me one last push. It was the end of the park. I pushed my already burning and fatigued legs to give me everything they had. All the while the footsteps were right on my heels, and the breathing had reached a deafening volume. Just at the point that I thought my legs were going to give way, I crossed the gate separating the dark park and the beautifully lit streets just beyond. Just as I was crossing the threshold, I heard an odd tearing noise, as though something sharp had just torn through something with the ease of tearing through tissue paper. I'll admit that, as I was in a state of near insane fear, I hadn't felt anything. I didn't stop to investigate the noise further. As I reached my home, panting and exhausted, I realised the footsteps had ceased several minutes ago. In fact, I hadn't heard them since I crossed the threshold out of the park. Still trembling with adrenaline, I slammed the front door shut and locked it tight. I tried to go about my usual routine, but my mind was consumed by the events of the night. What were those footsteps? Why did they stop when I turned around? And what kind of creature could make that sickening breathing sound? To calm my nerves, I took a long hot shower and settled in to watch some mindless TV. A few cold beers helped ease my anxiety, and after several hours of game shows and sci-fi dramas, I finally drifted into a dreamless sleep. I woke up the next morning feeling groggy and sore, as if I'd just run a marathon the day before. I checked the time and realised I only had 45 minutes to get ready for work. I quickly got dressed into my usual shirt, tie, jeans and shoes combination and was about to leave when I saw my backpack lying on the floor by the front door. But it wasn't the sight of the bag that made my blood run cold. It was the huge gaping slash across the front of it, as though an incredibly sharp knife had easily torn through the fabric. My legs felt weak and I had to sit down. The tearing noise I heard last night, just as I left the park, was so close. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was following me was out there, waiting for me. The sight of the slashed backpack had brought back all the fear and confusion from the previous night. I had another beer to calm my nerves, though I knew I shouldn't drink before work. My legs were already sore and aching from the run, and I wasn't mentally capable of going back to the park, especially not so soon after. I hailed a taxi and got in, my heart racing as I looked around, half expecting to see my pursuer's face staring back at me. The entire ride was nerve-wracking, and every time the driver hit a bump or took a sharp turn, I jumped in my seat. When we finally arrived at my office building, I took a deep breath before paying the driver and stepping out onto the sidewalk. As I walked in and greeted my co-workers, some of them seemed incredibly relieved to see me. "Oh, thank God. I saw the news this morning and I know you walked back through that park, so I was terrified it might have been you," Sandra on reception said as I walked into the office. "What news? Is everything okay?" I asked in response. She handed me her phone, and what I read made my vision swim. Sandra had to help me onto one of the sofas in our waiting area as she was terrified I was going to pass out. On her phone, there was a news report posted this morning titled, "Bizarre Park Murder Puts Police on High Alert." The article went on to describe how, when doing his usual rounds of the park in the morning, the local park keeper came across a horrific sight. There was the body of a jogger who must have been out for a nighttime jog. He'd been dragged to the edge of the park path where his chest had been split open, and whoever did this had removed the jogger's lungs with surgical precision. The police put the time of death at around 1 a.m, 3 hours after I'd been chased through the park by those ominous footsteps. The worst part about it is that when they found him, music was still playing through his headphones.